What I didn't know was that the most dangerous moments don't always arrive with shouting or sirens. Sometimes they come as a phone vibrating on a nightstand at 2:17 in the morning, carrying a voice you trust wrapped in panic, asking for help one last time. I didn't know that the money I was being asked for wasn't meant to save someone, but to protect a lie that had been growing quietly for years. I didn't know that the name I had spent decades keeping clean would become the shield someone else hid behind. And I didn't know that saying one simple sentence that night would set off consequences my wife never imagined, and a truth she could no longer control. My name is Henry Grant. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if you showed up, paid your bills, and kept your promises, things would eventually stay steady. I believed loyalty was quiet. That love meant carrying weight without complaining. I believed that if something went wrong in the middle of the night, it was my job to fix it. If you've ever felt like your value in a relationship was measured by how much you could give or how quickly you could rescue someone else from their choices, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar. Before we begin, take a second to like this video, subscribe if these stories resonate with you, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the quietest decisions change everything. I live in a small, paid-off ranch house on a quiet street in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's not impressive. One floor, no stairs, the kind of place men my age are proud of because it means no one owns you except the county tax office. In February, the cold settles into the walls and doesn't leave. That night, the furnace kept clicking on and off like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to keep going. The windows held back a hard winter wind, and the floorboards bit through my socks when I got out of bed. My wife, Laura, wasn't there. She'd said she fell asleep on the couch after dinner, phone in hand, eyes locked on whatever world she'd been scrolling through. The other side of the mattress was cold. After 17 years of marriage, you learn how to ignore certain things. You learn how to swallow questions before they grow teeth. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, then again. Laura's name lit up the screen. I checked the clock. 2:17 a.m. I answered. Henry. She didn't ease into it. She hit me with panic full force. Henry, oh my God. Evan's in the hospital. He's hurt bad. They're saying they can't give him the stronger pain medication unless we pay the deposit. He's in so much pain. In the background, I heard sounds meant to convince me. Fluorescent humming, wheels squeaking on tile. The kind of noise that wants you to believe you're hearing a hospital even if you're not sure you are. Where are you? I asked. I'm with him, she said, breathless and sharp at the same time. They need cash, right now. How much? She didn't hesitate. $38,000. The number sat heavy in the room. I sat up, the smell of old wood and menthol from the rub I used on my shoulders filling my nose. $38,000 wasn't pocket change. It was the kind of money you didn't ask for at 2 in the morning unless you expected the answer to be yes. They said if we don't pay the deposit, she continued, he'll have to suffer through the night. Evan, 31 years old, Laura's only child. I'd known him since he was a skinny teenager, all elbows and attitude. I taught him how to throw a baseball in the backyard, taught him how to drive in an empty church parking lot on Sunday afternoons. I never adopted him. Laura always said we'd do it later. Later never came. The bills did. Dead batteries, rent problems, new jobs that needed tools. Every time Laura would look at me with those wet eyes and say, he's trying, like trying was the same as doing. What happened? I asked. A fight, she said quickly, at a casino. He got jumped. A casino. My stomach tightened. Evan liked casinos the way some men liked fishing. Said it relaxed him. Said he had a system. I'd heard that word before from guys at the plant who lost entire paychecks by Wednesday. Which hospital, I asked. She answered, then added too fast. In Reno, Nevada. Reno. I stared at the dark window, snow piled gray under the streetlight. My truck sat in the driveway, crusted with salt. Real life was here. This emergency was far away. My transfer limit is maxed, she said. The cards are frozen. I need you to send it. I'll pay you back on Monday, I swear. Why can't you pay it? I asked. There was a beat. Then her voice softened the way it always did when she wanted me to fold. Because we're tapped out, honey, and he's crying. He's asking for you. That old reflex flared in my chest. Reach for your wallet. Fix it. Prove you're a good man. I could feel my fingers already opening my banking app. Then another thought slid in cold and clear. She kept saying, "My son. Not our son. My son." I remembered another call years earlier, another emergency, another medical deductible. I sent the money. A week later, I saw a photo online. Evan in a nightclub smiling like nothing in the world could touch him. When I confronted Laura back then, she cried. I apologized for overreacting. That was the rhythm of my life. "Laura," I said quietly, "call his real father." Silence. "Excuse me," she said. "Call Evan's biological father," I repeated. My voice didn't rise. It steadied. "I'm not doing this anymore." Her voice snapped sharp. "That man isn't in our lives." "And I am," I asked. "Because right now you're talking to me like I'm a debit card." She started yelling, saying Evan would suffer, saying I was heartless. Someone in the background said, "Ma'am, please." I pictured my pension folder in the drawer, the house I'd paid off. Every time I'd said yes because guilt was easier than standing firm. "I'm going back to sleep," I said. "Call his real father." I ended the call. The house settled. The furnace clicked. Somewhere down the block, a plow scraped the street, and for the first time in years, I slept like a man who had finally set something heavy down. I woke up just before sunrise the way I always had on workdays, even though I wasn't scheduled for anything. The room was dim and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. For a few seconds, my mind was empty. Then the memory of the call slid back in sharp and cold. Laura's voice, the number she'd said without blinking, the way my heart had raced when I told her no. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my feet on the floor. Same cold boards, same house. Something inside me felt different. Not lighter exactly, more still, like a noise that had been running in the background for years had finally shut off. I showered, shaved, and pulled on my work hoodie out of habit. 35 years on a plant floor will do that to you. You dress like you might be called in even when no one's calling anymore. In the kitchen, the coffee maker clicked on, filling the air with the smell of stale grounds I'd forgotten to change. I poured a mug and stood at the window watching the sky go from black to gray. As the house woke up, so did the memories. I hadn't married into Evan's life late. He was still a kid when Laura and I met, 12 years old, all limbs and attitude standing behind his mother with his arms crossed like the world already owed him something. I remember the first summer after we moved in together. I'd come home from work to find him in the driveway trying to fix a bike with the chain twisted beyond saving. He looked up at me like he expected to be laughed at. I didn't laugh. I grabbed my tools. That became a pattern. I showed him how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to ease a car forward without riding the clutch in the empty parking lot behind the church. Laura would stand on the steps clapping like he'd just won something. I was proud of him back then, proud in the way men get when they believe effort is enough. When Laura and I married, adoption came up once, then again, always later. There was always a reason to wait, paperwork, money, timing. I didn't push. I told myself being there mattered more than what the documents said. The first time Evan needed help, it was small. A bounced check, a late fee. Laura framed it like a temporary stumble. He was finding his footing. Everyone needed a little grace. I wrote the check. No speech, no lecture. The second time it was car trouble. The third rent. The fourth tools for a job that never lasted. Each time the story was different, but the shape of it stayed the same. Urgent, emotional. Just enough detail to make saying no feel cruel. And every time Laura played her part perfectly, she never demanded. She asked, softened her voice, told me how embarrassed Evan was, how grateful he'd be, how this would be the last time. I wanted to believe her. Believing was easier than questioning, and questioning always led to arguments that went nowhere. If I hesitated, she'd remind me that I was the only stable thing Evan had, that fathers didn't abandon their kids when things got hard, that family showed up. So I showed up. I didn't keep a ledger, but I could feel the weight of it, the money, the favors, the quiet compromises. each one small enough to justify on its own, heavy enough together to change the shape of my life. I paid. Then when things didn't improve, I apologized for expecting them to. There was a night years ago when Laura called me at work just before the end of a shift. Evan had a medical bill he couldn't cover. Something about a deductible. I transferred the money from the break room hands still smelling like solvent. A week later, scrolling online, I saw a picture of Evan in a nightclub bottle in hand, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. When I asked Laura about it, she cried. Said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. Said the photo meant nothing. I ended up apologizing for overreacting. Again, that was the rhythm. Help, doubt, guilt, silence. Standing there in my kitchen that morning, I realized something else. Laura never said our son when it came to the hard conversations. Not once. When things were good, Evan was part of our family. When money was involved, he was always my son. The shift was subtle, but it mattered. My phone buzzed on the counter. Laura's name. I didn't answer. It buzzed again. Then a text appeared. Please call me. A second followed. This is serious, Henry. I turned the phone face down and took a slow sip of coffee. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt, not in the way I'd expected to be. I felt cautious, like a man stepping onto ice he'd been standing on his whole life without noticing the cracks. For the first time, the sentence I'd said in the middle of the night didn't feel reckless. It felt necessary. Call his real father. I hadn't yelled it. I hadn't thrown it like a weapon. I'd said it the way you say something that's been true longer than you're ready to admit. Evan had a father. One I'd been told wasn't around. One I'd been told couldn't be relied on. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. But it wasn't my job to replace him at any cost. I wasn't refusing to help. I was refusing to be the default answer to every crisis, real or manufactured. That distinction mattered more than I'd ever realized. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it upside down on the rack. Outside, the street was waking up. Cars passing, a neighbor scraping ice off a windshield. Ordinary sounds, anchors. Whatever came next, I knew one thing. The line I'd drawn the night before wasn't about money. It was about stopping, about finally choosing not to carry something that had never been mine alone to carry. I picked up my phone, saw the missed calls, and left them there. For once, I wasn't rushing to explain myself. I was letting the boundary stand quiet and firm as the day moved forward. The morning stretched on quietly, almost stubbornly ordinary. Sunlight slid through the blinds and stopped on the kitchen table, catching dust I hadn't noticed before. The furnace had finally settled into a steady rhythm, and the house felt less like a shelter and more like a place that was simply there, waiting. I moved through it without urgency. No clock to beat, no problem demanding to be fixed right away. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something I needed to fill. I washed the mug I'd used and set it in the rack. I straightened a stack of mail that had been sitting unopened for days. Utility bills, a grocery flyer, a credit card offer I didn't remember asking for. I flipped it over, glanced at the logo, then set it back down without much thought. Everything felt slightly muted, like the volume on the world had been turned down a notch. My phone lay on the counter, face down. I didn't touch it. That was when it rang. Not Laura's ringtone this time, just the default buzz. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Something in my chest tightened, not panic, but recognition. The kind that comes when you know avoidance won't change what's coming. I answered. Henry Grant. Mr. Grant, a man said, calm and practiced. This is Officer Brian Walsh with the Gary Police Department in Indiana. Are you the stepfather of Evan Miller? The word stepfather landed heavier than it should have. I'm married to his mother, I said. Why are you calling me? There was a soft rustle of paper on the other end, like someone organizing a file. Your name came up during an incident report from last night. Mr. Miller was detained following an altercation at a casino parking structure. I leaned back against the counter. The coffee flyer slid an inch under my elbow. Is he okay? He has injuries consistent with a physical struggle, the officer said. Non-life-threatening. He's receiving medical attention. That should have been the end of it. A bad night, A bad decision? Another mess I didn't make. But the officer kept talking. During booking, we discovered irregularities related to a line of credit opened using your identifying information. The room seemed to narrow, not dramatically, just enough to notice. What kind of irregularities? A casino credit line, he said. $85,000, opened under your name and social security number, listed as guarantor. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The number didn't make sense. It was too clean, too specific. I didn't authorize anything like that, I said. I understand, he replied, his tone unchanged. That's why I'm calling. We'll need to ask you a few questions, and I strongly advise you to secure your financial accounts immediately. My gaze drifted to the filing cabinet against the wall. Tax returns, insurance statements, pension paperwork, 17 years of careful order. Officer, I said, I had no idea this existed. That's been noted, he said. You may also be contacted by federal investigators if this escalates. I suggest pulling your full credit report today. The call ended politely, professionally, like a man doing his job and moving on to the next one. I stood there for a long moment with the phone still in my hand. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop and then pulled away. Life kept going. So that was it. Not a hospital deposit, not a last-minute emergency, something else entirely, something that had been moving without me noticing. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory guiding them to a credit monitoring account I'd signed up for years ago after a coworker had his identity stolen by a relative. Back then, I'd told Laura you couldn't be too careful. She'd smiled and said I worried too much. The page loaded slowly. One soft inquiry, then another. Dates going back weeks. Then a hard inquiry tied to a casino-affiliated lender I didn't recognize. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a dull understanding. This wasn't one mistake. It had shape, sequence. I printed everything. The sound of the printer felt too loud in the quiet house. Each page slid out clean and official, covered in numbers and dates that didn't care how they made me feel. Paper doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't accuse. It just sits there and waits for you to look at it. When the printer stopped, I stacked the pages neatly and set them aside. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I felt empty instead, hollowed out in a way that wasn't sharp enough to hurt yet. My phone buzzed on the table. Laura. I didn't answer. Another buzz. A text. Henry, please call me. I turned the phone face down and pushed it a few inches away like it might move on its own. The quiet returned heavier now. Not peaceful, not tense, just hollow. The space between what I thought my life was and what it clearly wasn't. I stared at the wall calendar Laura had hung last Christmas. Puppies in Santa hats. I'd circled my next union physical in red. I wondered how many other things had been happening just under the surface while I was busy being dependable. The house didn't feel like mine anymore, not in the way it had the night before. It felt borrowed, temporary. If this story resonates with you and you have any advice for me in this moment, I'd really like to hear it. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Like I'd been standing in a room that was slowly being emptied without my permission. I closed the laptop and gathered the papers into a folder. I didn't know what the next step was yet. I only knew that whatever came next, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be slow, quiet, and it was going to change things in ways I hadn't fully understood yet. I didn't confront Laura that afternoon. Every instinct told me to lay the papers out on the table, to ask one clean question and demand one clean answer. But the feeling I'd woken up with that morning hadn't gone away. It had sharpened. This wasn't a moment for noise. It was a moment for footing. So instead, I drove to Liberty Grill, just off the main road, the kind of place where time moved at its own pace, and no one asked why you were there at 10 in the morning. The parking lot was half full. Retirees, contractors between jobs, men who understood that sometimes you needed to sit before you could think. Martin Cole was already in his usual booth brown jacket draped over the seat beside him, reading the paper like it still mattered. We'd worked together years ago, back when he handled internal audits for the plant. He was the kind of man who didn't rush words and didn't waste them either. He looked up when he saw me. "You look like hell," he said. "Morning to you too," I replied, sliding into the booth. I set the folder on the table between us. He didn't open it right away. He studied my face first, the way men do when they know something's off and want to confirm it before touching the evidence. Then he flipped the folder open and started reading. He went quiet. The diner hummed around us. Plates clinked, coffee poured. Martin moved through the pages slowly, methodically, like he was counting something that didn't want to be counted. "This wasn't sloppy," he said, finally tapping a line with his finger. "This was deliberate." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean? Look at the pattern," he said. "Soft inquiries first, someone checking limits, then the hard pull. You don't do that unless you expect approval." I thought about Laura's late nights on the couch, the glow of her phone lighting her face in the dark, about how comfortable she sounded asking for $38,000 at 2 a.m. "She couldn't have done this alone," I said. Martin took off his glasses and folded them carefully. "Who has access to your documents?" The sounds of the diner faded like someone had turned the volume down again. "My wife," I said. He nodded once, not surprised. "Then listen to me. You don't confront anyone yet. You protect yourself first. Protect how you freeze accounts, you pull full reports, you document everything, and you don't let guilt make decisions for you." Guilt. The word sat there between us like something we'd both known for a long time. Casino credit, Martin explained, wasn't like a regular credit card. It was closer to a personal loan backed by reputation more than collateral. When it went bad, things moved fast, and when people panicked, they dragged whoever they could down with them. My phone buzzed on the table. Laura's name, then another buzz. A text this time. "Please call me." Then another. "They're saying things that aren't true." I turned the phone face down. "Good," Martin said quietly. "Assume whatever you think this is, it's worse." I drove home slower than usual, letting each mile stretch out. When I got inside, the house felt different again. Smaller, like it was holding its breath. I went straight to the filing cabinet. Insurance, taxes, medical statements, everything neat, labeled in Laura's handwriting. At the back behind the homeowner's policy, I found an envelope I didn't recognize. Inside were copies of my Social Security card, my driver's license, and a pre-approval letter dated 3 weeks earlier. My knees went weak enough that I had to sit down. That was when the phone rang again. A different number this time. "Mr. Grant," a woman said, her voice tired but kind. "This is Agent Rebecca Moore with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We'd like to schedule an interview." I closed my eyes. "About what? About protecting you," she said. "And understanding who believed using your name was safe." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the furnace humming softly in the background. Laura had said it herself once without meaning to. Safer name, I just hadn't wanted to hear it. That evening, I went to the bank. The credit union manager recognized me immediately. We'd been exchanging nods for years without ever needing much else. I told her I needed to freeze joint accounts and secure my pension. She didn't ask why. She slid the forms across the desk and said, "You wouldn't believe how often this happens." From there, I drove past the old houses on the north side, the ones with good bones and tired paint. I pulled into a real estate office I'd passed 100 times and never thought I'd need. "I want to know my options," I told the agent. Quietly. She nodded. No judgment, no questions that mattered yet. By the time I got home, the sky had darkened. Laura's car wasn't in the driveway. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the kind I'd used my entire career, and started writing things down. Dates, amounts, accounts. Inspectors don't panic. They measure. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about stepping out of the way before something collapsed and took me with it. For the first time since that phone call at 2:17 a.m., I felt something solid settle in my chest. Control. Not over other people, just over myself. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to be dragged into it blindly. I was done being the anchor someone else planned to drown with. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence. It was pretending nothing had changed while I did it. Laura came home that evening with snow melting off her boots. cheeks flushed like she'd been crying or yelling or both. She set her purse down carefully, the way people do when they're trying not to make noise. "Evan's stable," she said too quickly. "They finally got him comfortable." "That's good," I replied, keeping my eyes on the television. She hovered in the doorway, waiting for more. When nothing came, she filled the space herself. "The police are blowing things out of proportion. Casinos do this all the time. He signed paperwork he didn't understand." I nodded once, non-committal, neutral. "Henry," she said, suspicion creeping into her voice. "You're acting strange." "Am I?" I asked. She studied my face like she was checking for a fever. "You didn't even ask how badly he was hurt." "He's alive," I said. "That matters." She seemed to relax just a little, like she'd scored a point. "Exactly. So we need to be united right now. United." The word landed wrong. It always had. She went to bed early. I stayed at the dining table with my laptop and a yellow legal pad, the house quiet, except for the tick of the clock she insisted on keeping because it reminded her of her father. I pulled full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. That was when the pattern finally showed itself. Not one big theft, a drip. Small revolving accounts opened and closed just under alert thresholds. Balance transfers that looked harmless on their own. Medical reimbursement refunds routed to an account I didn't recognize, then emptied within hours. Each move careful, each amount chosen not to draw attention. I traced the destination account. Laura's maiden name was on it. My chest tightened, but my hand stayed steady. Date, amount, source, destination. I wrote it all down. Inspectors don't panic, they document. Around midnight, I found something that made me laugh out loud. One sharp, humorless sound that echoed through the empty room. Evan's occupation listed on a credit application. Logistics consultant. I shook my head. Logistics. He had been moving money all right, just not his own. The laugh faded, quickly replaced by something heavier. A memory pushed in without asking permission. Evan at 16, knuckles white on the steering wheel in the empty church parking lot. "Easy," I'd told him. "You don't fight the car, you guide it." He stalled 3 times, cursed, laughed, then rolled forward smooth as butter. Laura had clapped like he'd won something. I'd been proud. God help me, I'd been proud. By morning, the total still wasn't staggering. Not yet, but it was growing quietly, systematically. This wasn't Evan freelancing stupidity. This was slow poison. I called Martin again. He came over that afternoon, snow crunching under his boots, breath fogging the cold air. We spread the papers across the table like a crime scene. "She knows the system," he said after a few minutes. "Medical billing teaches you how to sound urgent without being specific. People hear deposit and stop thinking." I thought back to the call at 2:17 a.m., the language, the clock she'd put on me. He'll suffer all night. That afternoon, a realtor's sign went up quietly at the edge of the yard. No balloons, no open house banner, just a clean white post with a small, discreet placard. I watched Laura notice it through the window. "What's that?" she asked. "Options," I said. Her face went pale, then flushed. "You're doing this because of Evan. I'm doing this because of me," I said. That night she cried. Real tears, or close enough to be convincing. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug she didn't drink from. "I'm scared," she said. "It feels like you're abandoning us." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed the way I'd stood during safety audits. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said. "I'm stepping out of the way." She looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done being used," I said. "And I'm done being lied to." Her voice softened. "You don't know the whole story. I know enough." That was when she shifted. The yelling stopped. The pressure changed shape. Over the next few days, she became sweetness itself. Cooked dinners I hadn't asked for. Touched my arm when she passed. Put on old movies she knew I liked. It felt rehearsed, like watching someone follow instructions they didn't write. Behind it all, the dominoes kept falling. Bank notices, missed payments. Evan's voice in a voicemail slurred and angry. "You think you're better than us now?" I deleted it without listening to the rest. Standing in the garage one night, surrounded by tools I'd bought with honest money, something settled in my chest. This wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. And for the first time, I understood exactly what Martin meant. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the anchor. If any part of this feels familiar, I'd be interested to know what you noticed first. I waited 3 days before I did anything with the binder. Not because I was unsure, because I wanted to be certain I wasn't acting out of anger. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing useful behind. What I felt now was colder, deliberate, the kind of focus you get when you finally understand the shape of the problem. The binder sat on the dining table, plain and gray, the kind you'd buy in bulk at an office supply store. Inside, it was everything Martin and I had organized together. Credit reports, bank statements, screenshots, dates and times lined up so neatly they almost looked polite. No commentary, no accusations, just facts arranged in a way that didn't need a voice raised over them. Laura noticed it the second morning it was there. She stopped short when she walked past the table, eyes flicking down and then away. "What's that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Paperwork," I said. She nodded too quickly and kept moving. I watched her shoulders tighten as she went into the kitchen. Over the next day, the evidence kept arriving. More statements, notifications from accounts I didn't recognize but now understood. One charge here, one transfer there. Nothing dramatic on its own. Together it formed a line you could follow without getting lost. That night, after Laura went to bed, I sat at the table and added the final section. A timeline, 3 years long. Evan's gambling losses marked alongside moments Laura had called me asking for help. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to tell the truth. I didn't sleep much, not because I was anxious, because my mind wouldn't stop replaying moments I'd ignored. Late nights on the couch, calls taken in another room, the way she always handled the mail before I saw it. By morning, the binder was finished. I left it on the table where she couldn't miss it. Laura came downstairs around 9. She was dressed neatly, hair done the way she looked when she wanted to appear composed. She poured coffee, then finally glanced at the binder again. "You've been busy," she said. "I've been careful," I replied. She sat across from me, folding her hands around her mug. "Henry, whatever you think you're doing, you're making things worse." I didn't answer. She sighed, leaning forward. Evan made mistakes, big ones, but he was desperate. People do things they don't understand when they're scared. And the accounts I asked, the refunds. Her eyes flicked to the binder and back to my face. "That's complicated. It's actually not," I said. "It's very simple when you lay it out." She pushed her chair back, slightly defensive now. "Why are you treating me like I'm some kind of criminal?" I stood and walked around the table, placing the binder directly in front of her. "Because criminals don't always look like criminals," I said. "Sometimes they look like people asking for help." Her mouth opened, then closed. She flipped the binder open, scanning the first page. Her breathing changed, not dramatically, just enough to notice. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You don't understand what I was dealing with. I understand more than you think." She looked up at me, frustration bleeding through the panic. "You're blowing this up. You always do when things get uncomfortable." I leaned back against the counter. "You asked me for $38,000 at 2 in the morning, I said. "And you didn't tell me the truth." Her eyes flashed. "I was trying to protect my son by using my name." She waved a hand dismissively. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Explain why my Social Security number is attached to an $85,000 casino credit line." She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "You're acting like I had a choice." "You always have a choice," I said. She started pacing, hands running through her hair. "You think his father would have helped. He wouldn't even answer the phone." "That's not your decision to make," I said. She stopped pacing and turned toward me, eyes wet but sharp. "You don't know what it's like to be his mother." "No," I said quietly. "But I know what it's like to be used." Her shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of her all at once. She sank back into the chair and covered her face with her hands. "I just needed something solid," she said. "Something that wouldn't fall apart." I waited. She looked up at me, then eyes, red, voice lower. "Your name just sounded safer." The words hung there bare and unmistakable. Not felt, not was, sounded. I didn't react, didn't raise my voice, didn't ask her to repeat it. I nodded once slowly the way you do when a machine finally makes a noise that tells you exactly where it's broken. "Thank you," I said. For what she asked, confused. For saying it out loud, I replied. I closed the binder and slid it back toward myself. The moment didn't feel explosive. It felt final, like the click of a lock you didn't realize had been holding until it opened. Laura stared at me, searching for something anger, forgiveness, bargaining. I gave her none of it. I picked up the binder and carried it into the other room. The turning point had already passed. She just hadn't felt it yet. The federal courthouse in Indianapolis smelled like floor wax and winter coats, beige walls, low ceilings, no windows where you wanted them. It was the kind of place designed to drain emotion out of people, to make everything feel procedural and inevitable. Justice wasn't meant to be dramatic here. It was meant to be final. I arrived early and sat alone on the hard wooden bench, the binder resting on my lap like a quiet witness. I folded my hands the way I'd learned to do during disciplinary hearings at the plant. Calm, still, prepared. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. Laura came in 10 minutes late. Her heels clicked too loud against the floor, drawing a few glances. She wore a navy coat I recognized from last fall, bought with money I now knew came from a medical reimbursement that had never reached me. Her hair was perfect. Her eyes were red enough to look convincing. She didn't look at me. Evan entered through a side door with a public defender at his elbow. He looked smaller than I remembered. Puffy face, split lip, a brace under his jacket. He kept his eyes on the floor like it might open up and swallow him if he stared hard enough. When the judge entered the room, stood. Chairs scraped. Someone coughed. Then everything settled into place. The prosecutor spoke first. Calm voice. Clean timeline. Casino credit lines opened under my name. Revolving accounts tied to my Social Security number. Medical refunds rerouted through accounts I didn't control. Dates, amounts, paperwork stacked in a way that didn't invite argument. Paper doesn't care about feelings. Laura shifted in her seat when her maiden name came up. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering too fast. Evan stared at his hands. Then my name was called. Mr. Grant, the judge said, peering over his glasses. You are listed as guarantor on multiple accounts. Did you authorize any of these? No, Your Honor, I said. My voice didn't shake. I didn't know they existed until I was contacted by law enforcement, and when you discovered them, I froze my accounts, secured my assets, cooperated fully. The judge nodded once and made a note. The prosecutor stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce Exhibit D. A man rose from the back of the room, mid-50s, broad shoulders, work boots that looked worn, not decorative. His hands twisted together like he wasn't used to being watched. This is Thomas Miller, the prosecutor said, the biological father of Evan Miller. Laura's head snapped up. Evan finally looked at someone. Thomas cleared his throat. I've been paying child support since Evan was born, he said. I tried to stay in contact. Laura changed numbers, moved, told me Evan didn't want to see me. That's not true, Laura blurted, half standing. Sit down, ma'am, the judge said, not unkindly. Thomas kept going. I found out about the casino mess when a collection agency called me last month, said I was the father. That's when I learned my son had been using Henry's name. Evan's face crumpled. Mom said you wouldn't help, he muttered. Thomas looked at him, pain plain as day. I would have helped you get treatment, he said. I wouldn't have helped you gamble. The room went quiet in that way that feels heavier than noise. Then the recording was played. Laura's voice filled the courtroom. Small, clear, unmistakable. His name just sounded safer. No context, no explanation, just the truth stripped bare. Laura covered her mouth. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. She shook her head. Mrs. Grant, the judge asked, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? She didn't answer. The judge leaned back and exhaled slowly. Noted. Evan's public defender stood. Your Honor, my client was injured and under duress. Your client committed fraud, the judge said evenly. While injured. Both things can be true. He turned to me. Mr. Grant, the court finds no evidence that you authorized or benefited from these actions. All claims against you are dismissed. Something loosened in my chest. Not relief, exactly. Release. Then the hammer fell where it needed to. Laura was charged with conspiracy to commit financial fraud and identity misuse. Evan's charges were reduced but not erased. Fraud, assault, mandatory treatment. Evan slumped in his chair like a puppet with its strings cut. Laura stood shaking. Henry, she said, stepping toward me as the judge called recess. Please. I was just trying to protect my son. I stood slowly. People were watching. Clerks, lawyers, strangers who would forget us by dinner. I spent 17 years protecting him, I said quietly. You spent them using me. Her mouth opened, then closed. In the hallway, a few reporters hovered but didn't pounce. This wasn't a scandal big enough to trend. It was small-town justice, the kind that ruins lives quietly. A man from church stood near the elevators. He'd once told me abandoning family was a sin. He wouldn't meet my eyes now. I walked out of the building without looking back. The cold air hit my face sharp and honest. There was no cheering, no satisfaction, just the steady knowledge that the truth once written down didn't need my help anymore. I moved in April when the last of the winter finally loosened its grip, and the sky over the lake stopped looking like steel. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple with a baby on the way wanted the quiet street and the solid bones. I wished them luck, and meant it. Funny how little you actually own once you stop propping up other people's lives. My new place sits just outside Michigan City, close enough to the water that the morning light finds its way into the kitchen without asking. One floor, no stairs, a small porch that faces east so the sun hits the coffee mug at the right angle if you wake up early enough. The first night I slept there, I left the window cracked. I woke to gulls instead of a phone buzzing with panic. It took me a minute to remember that was allowed. Life got smaller in a good way. I unpacked only what I needed. A few tools, some clothes. The binder went into a drawer and stayed there. I wasn't running from anything. I was done carrying it, Laura wrote once. A letter, not a text. Handwritten. I recognized the slant immediately. She said she was sorry, said fear makes people do things they don't recognize, said she never meant for it to go that far. I read it once and put it away. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry. Anger takes energy. I was done spending mine. Evan entered treatment as part of his sentence. I heard that secondhand through Martin, who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else. I hope he stays. I really do. Wishing someone well doesn't require you to carry them anymore. The church stopped calling. So did most of the people who'd had opinions before they had facts. A few weeks later, a man from my old bowling league found me at a small cafe by the marina. He ordered black coffee, sat down across from me, and cleared his throat. I was wrong, he said. I judged before I knew. I nodded. It happens. That was it. No speeches, no absolution ceremony. Just two men watching boats bob in the water and pretending that was enough because sometimes it is. I started volunteering one morning a week at the Union Hall, helping guys my age sort through paperwork they'd been avoiding, pensions, beneficiaries, accounts they didn't realize were still open. You'd be surprised how many men don't know who's listed on their finances, or maybe you wouldn't. On Sundays, I cook for myself. Real meals, simple ones, nothing that needs rescuing. I sit on the porch with the lake wind on my face and think back to that night at 2:17 a.m. The demand, the pressure, the way my heart raced when I finally said no. I used to believe love meant never letting people fall. Now I know better. Love without limits isn't love. It's liability. Revenge didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with silence, with paperwork, with the quiet decision to stop paying for someone else's lies. It came with waking up and realizing the only person I had to carry was myself. If you're listening to this and you've ever been treated like a wallet instead of a partner, like your worth was measured by how much you could fix, I want you to hear this clearly. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to protect what you earn. You're allowed to sleep through the night. If this story felt familiar, take a moment and think about where your boundaries should be. And if you want to share your experience, I'm listening, leave a comment below. If stories like this help you see your own situation more clearly, remember to like, share, and subscribe so others can find them too. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hang up the phone and let the quiet teach you who you really are.